Award-winning futurist, researcher, and keynote speaker Nikolas Badminton joining us on Canada Now. Nick, this time around we talk about Bitcoin. And I was just getting around to the point where I'm thinking, all right, this is a thing. This isn't going anywhere. And then here you come along and you shoot me a text or an email or whatever it is, and you went, Jeff, I don't think Bitcoin is necessarily going to be around in the future. I'm not a big believer in Bitcoin's future.
Yeah, and as a futurist, I'm sort of cast into the desert to walk alone with these sort of opinions somewhat, it's interesting. So Bitcoin's been around for a long time. For the listeners, it's a decentralized digital currency. You've probably all seen it flying around the internet in terms of news and on Twitter and whatever. It doesn't have a central bank. It doesn't have a single administrator, and it's a peer-to-peer Bitcoin network, and people call it a currency, but really it's an asset class. And now it's sort of gone from that idea of something that goes against centralized banking to becoming something not too dissimilar.
So now what is this story about a hamster that's been trading cryptocurrencies in a cage rigged to automatically buy and sell tokens, and that's been happening since June? It's outperforming the S&P 500.
I mean, and this kind of shows the ridiculous nature of sort of the pump and dump and the hype cycles of people behind sort of cryptocurrencies becoming this huge value, or these massive drops, or these huge gains, or whatever. Yeah, it's a hamster that can jump in its wheel. It can choose different cryptocurrencies to trade, and then it can crawl through one of two tubes depending on what it does. And it's kind of interesting. It's just this sort of thought experiment to say, there's actually no formula here. And what we've got in Bitcoin is we've got things called whales, and these are people that hold the majority of Bitcoin. And there's supposed to be less than 100 whales that really hold the majority of Bitcoin. Sounds quite similar to central banks, really, and large banking organizations. And oftentimes they have interviews and they're like, I think that the value of Bitcoin is going to go to $1 million or $2 million or $5 million in 10 years. And everyone goes, wow, let's go and buy Bitcoin. Let's do this. Let's do that. I mean, it sort of jumped the shark in terms of being a useful currency a number of years ago, even though you've got countries like El Salvador that are trying to bring it as currency, places like Cuba as well. You've got places like China that are outlawing, the mining of, the spending of, and trading of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin as well, because of what it can do to centralized banking systems. But the wild, unregulated potential, Ponzi scheme that Bitcoin's going to, I think, actually turn out to be. So it's interesting, are we going to choose, fascism in the form of a central bank, or fascism in the form of these crypto whales that are trying to really centralize something that could have been a really good idea and being decentralized, right?
Well, you mentioned China, and I wanted to ask about them. Like, does China need to be a player if Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are the wave of the future?
So if these governments and central banks don't have the idea around new kinds of currencies and regulations around such, then it's a risk to them and their economies, right? So China in its good old ways of being totalitarianism, like, is coming in and say, no, we didn't start this. You guys started. I mean, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories about who started Bitcoin. There's a guy called Satoshi. No one knows who that is. But there was a paper that came out a number of years ago that very legitimately talked about the blockchain and Bitcoin as an idea. And I used to speak to a lot of people that were very enthusiastic about this 10 years ago, and they were mining and whatever. And it was an interesting, very small scale thought experiment. And then just the last few years, it's just gone absolutely off the chain in terms of, its value as an asset class, its hype, the fact that you're sort of fighting against the system, but you're ultimately swimming in a pool with the sharks that run organized crime, sex trafficking, and pedophile rings and those kind of things. And it just sits wrong with me, Jeff, and I'm kind of ranting on this a little bit, right? And it's like the conversations I have with people that have got crypto, and they're like, so Nick, how can I get my money out of crypto without paying taxes? It's like you have to pay taxes. I mean, if you work within the taxation system, you can work out how to be tax efficient, but you have to work it out. Everyone's trying to really like operate in a way that's sort of underground and a little bit sleazy, if you ask me.
Well,
and again, as a futurist, I'm not being, particularly put in a very sort of favorable corner on this kind of thing by having this opinion. But I think people have to really be honest that this isn't necessarily a better world, right?
Yeah, but is China forcing residents in China, those in China, into doing this? Because one would think that in Chinese officials cracking down on cryptocurrencies, how is China actually going to enforce this? Like wouldn't crypto users in China manage to circumvent new restrictions just because they have to? They feel they have to?
People are just going to go underground, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that will be breaking the law on a daily basis, right, Jeff? China was having there were some operations in China mining huge amounts of Bitcoin and really working that out, and now they're really trying to work out how the hell to get out of there, I reckon.
So we're seeing China doing this. In cracking down on cryptocurrencies. Are other countries going to follow China's lead without saying that, because maybe it's not a popular opinion, hey, we're going to do what China is doing these days. But do you think that other countries are going to say, I think they may have this one right. I think we're going to have to do the same thing?
Well, when you've got something that was basically a cryptographic subcultural sort of movement a few years ago, and now it's become sort of the asset classes that you have to watch on a daily basis, and some of the big banks sort of leaning into it and seeing a huge amount of profit for their clients potentially as well. That it sort of it's a very gray, murky swamp that Bitcoin inhabits, really. And there's lots of other really decent cryptocurrencies, like Ethereum is super interesting because they're trying to find a huge amount of utility. There are some blockchain applications out there that could be potentially very useful in revolutionizing how we transfer money across the world and whatever. But I just think that until we get rid of some of this sort of the dirty money of Bitcoin, these other potentially good applications are really going to be stifled. So on a country by country basis, people are going to be holding back and trying to work out how it's regulated, not regulated. There's a lot of scamming that goes on. There's a lot of cybercrime that goes on with regards to cryptocurrencies, as well as within Bitcoin itself. So who's going to get behind that? But then you could argue on the flip side, well, cash is the same kind of thing, right? And that was the old way, just very difficult to hide and very difficult to launder as well.
Yeah, well, but now these days nobody wants to touch money. They want they don't want anything tangible for a variety of reasons. Is it going to take like some heavy hitter that's out there that's going to get behind one of these good applications for cryptocurrency in general to take off?
I don't dislike the idea of digital currencies. I don't dislike the idea of challenger currencies as well, Jeff. But I think it's gonna come in a form that's more like the Canadian dollar and its competitor, right? And I think it's going to come from big tech companies that have got their own private ecosystems. So the other day, Facebook went down. It's like a whole version of the internet disappeared, right? And we could talk about that for a long time. But Amazon's like its own version of the internet as well. Once we've got these places, it's like Amazon turns around and says, okay, here's an Amazon dollar. And, if you work at Amazon or you trade within Amazon or whatever, you can earn Amazon dollars. It might be called something else when they come out with it. But they're going to create a closed ecosystem where they'll try and create an entirely different monetary ecosystem. They own Whole Foods, so you can spend your money there. You can literally spend all your money on Amazon.com. You probably work out how to do that through rent because your landlords are going to be actually using Amazon products as well, right? And suddenly, if you've got a currency that's a direct challenger to to something like the Canadian dollar, something like Grisham's law kicks in, and Grisham was this economist and philosopher that talked about good currency and bad currency. Canadian dollar, good currency, controlled by central bank. Bad currency, this currency owned by someone like Amazon, Google, whoever. And when that outweighs value versus the good currency and starts to take over at scale, then we've got big trouble. And it's not a case of crypto this and crypto that. It's a case of new currencies revolutionizing the world. And could the Amazon dollar be the one unifying currency around the world, right? Except for in China.
Well, I'll tell you, growing up, what came close back in our day was Canadian Tire money. Like when you were a kid, if you could get Canadian Tire money, because I'd go with my dad to Canadian Tire, and you make, my dad would make the purchases, and then he'd get let's say 35 cents in Canadian Tire money, which were bills, right? And he'd give them to me because he's like, I'm going to end up losing this, so you take it. And I would collect it. I would collect that Canadian Tire money. Whenever I break a hockey stick, I'd go to Canadian Tire and I'd buy my hockey stick from Canadian Tire. So I kind of think of all of this in the same way when I was a kid in Canadian Tire money.
Yeah, but imagine if you had the same mechanism, but that dollar value was equivalent to a Canadian dollar, and it didn't take you that long to actually save up for a new hockey stick, and then you just forget about the Canadian dollar. The Canadian Tire money is directly linked as a sort of a gamified reward off of spending money in store.
Yes, yeah.
We're talking about a direct replacement. Right?
Yes,
so
yes.
That's where it gets interesting. That's why Bitcoin's having such a hard time around the world. That's why cryptocurrencies are being sort of really put under the microscope, and that's why the next few years, I think 5, 10, 20 years, Bitcoin still be around. In what shape and form and what you can do with it, I just think it's going to get more and more difficult to spend. Eventually, it could potentially be worth very little and disappear.
Check out NikolasBadminton.com. Futurist researcher, keynote speaker Nick Badminton. Always a pleasure, my friend. We'll talk again.
Take care, Jeff.
I'll
see you on the internet.
So. All right. Looking forward to it. There is Nikolas Badminton. Again, NikolasBadminton.com.